Hi, Charles Christian here, talking about folklore and fairy tales and whether some well-known fairy tales are actually based on real people. And the answer is yes, some of them are. Take Bluebeard, the tale of the murderous man who used to kill his wives if they asked too many questions. That's believed to have been based on a person called, let's check his full name there, Connemore the Cursed. And the story is Connemore, who lived in Brittany, that's the western corner of France, in the 8th century thereabouts. He'd been told that his son would be the person to kill him. So to avoid such an occurrence, he murdered his wives every time they became pregnant. And the story went on from there. Another version of the tale is that it is based on Gilles de Rais, who was for a long time a noble knight in medieval France fighting for Joan of Arc, but later in his life he turned into a paedophile serial killer and killed dozens, if not hundreds, of children and tortured them and did disgusting things with them. He met his end he was arrested eventually and was first garroted and then burned at the stake. So yeah, Bluebeard was definitely a real one. Some of the other tales are probably based on historical events rather than people. For example, the tale of Hansel and Gretel and the cannibalism and the house and everything seems to be based on a major famine that struck Europe during the early years of the 14th century, 1315 to 1317, when there were tales of people actually killing and eating their children. Although there's another version that says it may have been based on a woman who was known to be a very good cook. Her name was Katharina Schradine, and it was in the 1600s, and she apparently could cook gingerbread and cakes and sweets and things, but she made a few enemies and they accused her of being a witch, and she was killed rather gruesomely by being pushed into one of her own bread ovens. Rapunzel, her with the long hair, it said she's actually based on the tale of Saint Barbara, as she's known in the Eastern Orthodox Church. And probably the favourite one would probably be Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. A lot of suggestion that this is the tale of Margareta Von Voldek, who was a 16th century noblewoman, and she fell foul of her stepmother, common trait in fairy tales, and she was having an affair with a young man who would later become King Philip II of Spain. But it was thought it was an unsuitable marriage, and so she was poisoned, possibly by poisoned food, maybe even the poisoned apple. As to the dwarfs, well, they're also based on real life. Margareta's family owned copper mines in Bavaria, and mining in the 16th century, we're talking 1500s, was fairly primitive, and some of the galleries that miners were working in were only 20 inches big, so in height. So the ideal people to do the mining were either men of unnaturally short dimensions, growth, maybe even stunted, or worse still, children. And because it was dangerous work, they would get injured by rock falls and things of that nature. And so again, there was this rather, concern that, that when people talk about dwarves and that they're, hideous and misshapen, they actually were talking about young miners who were misshapen and deformed from the injuries they'd received and the hard work that they'd been going through, and the fact that physical work like that damages your muscles and your joints and can lead to all manner of complaints. So there is an element in a lot of fairy tales that a real person is there. Sometimes it's stretched and it's not really true. There's an English one about little Jack Horner sitting in the corner, and there's a very elaborate story that this was all down to a character who defrauded King Henry VIII of the title deeds for a valuable property, but that's stretching things a bit, and there's no proof that any of this really happened. You get a similar with the tale with the nursery rhyme, Ring a Ring of Roses. Got it. There is suggestion that this is related to the Great Plague in the 17th century, which struck London and the southern part of England and caused a huge amount of deaths. And that the Ring of Roses is the rash you got when you caught the plague, and the sneezing, a tissue, all fall down, was the final stages of it. But again, the actual nursery rhyme didn't emerge until 200 plus years after the event, so it seems stretching it a bit. Similar with the tale about London bridges falling down, which some people say, particularly the bit about set a man to watch it overnight, is actually about foundation sacrifices, when people would be either killed and buried in the foundations of an ancient building, or even buried alive there to act as a spirit, to be the metaphysical foundation of the building. There's no actual link between those activities, which were very old, going back to Roman times, to the actual London Bridge story. So, it's a case of folklorists looking at a story and finding more in there than there really is. A couple of other ones worth talking about. Winnie the Pooh and Christopher Robin. Christopher Robin was based on the author A.A. Milne's own son, and from all reports, Christopher Robin had a thoroughly miserable adult life because everybody used to make fun of him with his Christopher Robin tales from Winnie the Pooh. And also we have Alice Liddell, who was the basis for Alice in Wonderland in that tale. Again, obviously she didn't have those adventures, but the writer based it upon that character. So they do happen, but some of them are fake. As for me, well, I confess in a novel I wrote some years ago, I did actually use a real person I knew as a villain, and he died a horrible death because basically he was a horrible person and he deserved it. I was also asked, what am I working on next? Well, funnily enough, I'm working on a book. It's going to be an almanac of sorcerers and witches, historical, taking through from earliest times, the Christian Bible, through to the modern days, the various epochs witchcraft went through and witchcraft magic went through, and looking at the lives of some of the better known characters. That'll be out sometime next year. Thank you for listening.